The massive Imperial scout ship slowed as it approached the edge of the Sol system. On its bridge, Captain Reed of the Galactic Empire stared at the readings with confusion. His sensors were picking up thousands of small objects in a web-like pattern around the entire star system. "Strange," he muttered, zooming in on the nearest object. "These appear to be defensive satellites." His second-in-command looked over his shoulder. "Primitive designs, but there are so many of them. Should we contact Central Command?" Before Reed could answer, a message crackled through their communications system. "This is Admiral James of the Earth Defense Force. You have entered restricted space. Identify yourself immediately." The human's response time impressed Reed. His ship had barely crossed the defense network's perimeter, and they were already being hailed. Perhaps these creatures weren't as primitive as they appeared. "This is Captain Reed of the Galactic Empire's scout fleet. We come with a message from Emperor Vale himself." He straightened his uniform, activating the video feed. "We request an audience with your world's leaders." There was a pause, and Reed wondered if the humans were scrambling to prepare for such an important meeting. Instead, Admiral James's response came quickly and calmly. "We will expect your diplomatic team at the lunar base Alpha in 6 hours. Sending coordinates now. Please limit your delegation to 5 members." Reed blinked in surprise. The humans already had a base on their moon, and they weren't panicking at first contact. 6 hours later, Ambassador Dean led the Empire's diplomatic team through the airlock of Lunar Base Alpha. The station was smaller than Imperial standards, but impressively efficient in its design. Armed guards lined the corridors, their faces professional and alert. In the conference room, Admiral James sat with his team, their posture relaxed but their eyes sharp. The Admiral was an older man with gray hair and a face that showed both wisdom and determination. Ambassador Dean spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of 10,000 worlds. "The Galactic Empire extends its greetings to humanity. We have watched your development with great interest, and we believe you are ready to join our grand confederation of species." He placed a holographic projector on the table, displaying a map of the Empire's territory. "Your solar system lies at a strategic point in our expansion plans. Join us, and you'll have access to technologies beyond your imagination. Refuse." He let the threat hang in the air. Admiral James didn't even glance at the map. Instead, he studied Dean's face with an expression that made the ambassador oddly uncomfortable. "You're proposing we surrender our sovereignty." "We prefer to call it joining the family of civilized worlds," Dean replied smoothly. "You would have a voice in the Imperial Senate, access to our trade routes, and protection from any threats." A younger officer at the table failed to hide a smirk. Admiral James shot him a warning look before turning back to Dean. "We request 48 hours to consider your proposal." Dean frowned. Most species either accepted immediately or needed weeks to process first contact. 48 hours. "Yes," James replied. "We have protocols for this situation." Back on the Imperial ship, Reed turned to Dean. "They have protocols for first contact. How could they possibly be prepared for something they've never experienced?" Dean shook his head. "Something feels off. Most primitive species are either terrified or in awe of us. These humans seem almost amused." Meanwhile, deep within a mountain complex on Earth, Military Command was reviewing footage. Screens displayed centuries of human warfare, ancient battles, world wars, Cold War innovations, guerrilla tactics, and modern conflicts. "They have no idea," General Thompson said, watching the Imperial ship through advanced sensors. "They think technology alone wins wars." Admiral James joined them, fresh from the lunar meeting. "Their ships are impressive, but their tactics are basic. No redundancies, no real security protocols. They've never faced a species that could truly challenge them." "Should we show them?" asked Thompson. James nodded. "Prepare the historical archives. When we meet them again, they need to understand exactly what they're dealing with. It's only fair to warn them." In orbit, The Imperial ship's crew celebrated their successful first contact, unaware that humanity was about to give them a history lesson they would never forget. Exactly 48 hours after their first meeting, the Empire's diplomatic team returned to Lunar Base Alpha. Ambassador Dean entered the conference room with confident steps, ready to welcome humanity into the Empire's embrace. His smile faded when he saw what awaited him. Instead of submission documents, the walls were covered with projection screens. Commander Thomas stood at the head of the table, his military uniform crisp and precise. No Admiral James this time. This meeting had a different purpose. "Please be seated," Thomas said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We've prepared our response to your proposal." Dean sat down, noting the absence of the usual diplomatic pleasantries. "I trust you've seen the wisdom of joining our empire." Thomas pressed a button, and the screens came to life. "Before we give our answer, we want to show you something. This is Earth, circa 1939. The screens filled with black and white footage of World War II. Tanks rolling across Europe, planes dropping bombs, soldiers fighting in trenches. Dean watched with mild interest, seeing only primitive weapons. "This was just one of our world wars," Thomas continued, changing the footage. "Here's what we did to two cities when we wanted to end it." The screen showed mushroom clouds rising over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Dean shifted uncomfortably. "Impressive for your time, but surely." "We're just getting started," Thomas interrupted, switching to Cold War footage. "Here's what we did next. We spent 50 years preparing to destroy our entire planet, developing weapons that could kill everyone, several times over. We had two major powers pointing thousands of nuclear weapons at each other, and we called it peace through mutual destruction." The Empire's military advisor leaned forward, his expression changing from boredom to concern as he watched submarines launching missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles rising from silos, and stealth bombers disappearing into the night. "But that's not the interesting part," Thomas continued, switching to modern combat footage. "This is what we did when we fought with rules." The screens showed precision strikes, cyber warfare, drone swarms, and urban combat tactics. "These are just tools," Dean said dismissively, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, Ambassador. These are lessons. Every war taught us something new. When we couldn't match our enemies in strength, we learned guerrilla warfare. When we couldn't match them in numbers, we developed better tactics. When we couldn't match them in resources, we got creative." He switched to footage of modern special forces training. "This is what we do for practice. We train soldiers to operate in any environment, behind enemy lines, with minimal support. We've mastered the art of asymmetric warfare because we spent centuries fighting ourselves." Dean's aide whispered something in his ear, but he waved it away, his eyes fixed on the screens. "You see, Ambassador," Thomas continued, "your empire has spent centuries expanding, absorbing peaceful species, or those too primitive to resist. You've never faced an enemy that spent its entire history learning how to fight stronger opponents. You've never had to adapt, to evolve, to think beyond direct confrontation." He turned off the screens, leaving the room in stark silence. "That was just a small sample of what humans do when we fight each other. Now, imagine what we'll do if we have to fight you." Dean stood up, his face pale. "Is this a threat?" "No," Thomas replied calmly. "This is a warning. You came here expecting us to submit or resist conventionally. Instead, we're giving you a chance to walk away. Because if you force this conflict, we will not fight fair. We will not fight by your rules. We will use every dirty trick, every unconventional tactic, and every brutal strategy we've learned from millennia of warfare." He slid a data chip across the table. "Take this back to your emperor. It contains more examples of human warfare. And remember, everything you saw today, that was us fighting ourselves. Imagine what we'll do to an outside threat." The Empire's delegation left the moon in silence, their earlier arrogance replaced by thoughtful concern. As their ship disappeared into space, Thomas turned to his aide. "Do you think they'll listen?" The aide shook his head. "They've been the strongest for too long. They'll convince themselves we're bluffing." Thomas nodded. "Then they'll learn the hard way. Activate Phase 2. The Imperial War Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as General Marcus paced before the massive holographic display of Earth's solar system. The data chip from the humans played its last footage, showing scenes of urban warfare and guerrilla tactics that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "They're bluffing," Marcus declared, stopping the playback with a wave of his hand. "These are historical records, ancient history. Look at their current technology level. They barely have colonies on their own moon and neighboring planet." Emperor Vale watched from his elevated throne, his ancient eyes studying the tactical display. "You seem very certain, General." "My Emperor, we have conquered 1,000 worlds. Our ships can reduce continents to ash. Their primitive projectile weapons and crude nuclear devices are no match for our energy shields." Marcus pointed to Earth's defense network. "Even their orbital defenses are basic compared to ours." A younger council member raised her hand. "But what about their warning?" They seemed very confident. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Confidence born of ignorance. They've never seen our true military might. They fight in dirt and ruins while we command the stars themselves." He brought up a tactical display. "I propose a 3-wave attack. First, we take their Mars colony as a show of force. Then we establish orbital superiority and demand surrender. If they resist, we target their major military installations." Emperor Vale leaned forward. "And if they use these guerrilla tactics they showed us? Impossible in space warfare, my Emperor. Space is open. There's nowhere to hide. Their experience with ground combat means nothing in void battles." Little did Marcus know that at that very moment, deep within Earth's Cheyenne Mountain complex, humans were monitoring his entire speech. Advanced listening devices, hidden on the Empire's diplomatic shuttle during their moon visit, transmitted every word of the War Council. Admiral James stood before Earth's United Military Command, representatives from every major nation watching the Empire's plans unfold. "They took the bait," he said, a grim smile on his face. "They think we showed them everything." General Thompson brought up their own tactical display. All orbital platforms are in position but powered down. They read as inactive satellites to their sensors. The Mars Defense Force is ready for Protocol Omega. "And the Ghost Fleet?" James asked. 100 ships hidden in the asteroid belt. Crew ready and waiting. Empire sensors still can't detect our stealth systems. In the back of the room, Commander Thomas watched the Empire's tactical display with amusement. Their attack plan was so straightforward. No deception, no backup plans, no contingencies. Just pure force. The way they'd always done it. "How long until they attack?" someone asked. James studied the Empire's ship movements. "They're gathering their fleet now. 3 days at most. Are the civilians ready?" Thompson nodded. "Mars colony evacuation will be complete in 36 hours. As far as the Empire knows, we're still running normal operations there." "And our surprise?" Thomas asked. James pressed a button, showing a new display. Hidden among Earth's natural satellites and space debris were thousands of small automated combat drones, ancient-looking on the outside, but containing humanity's most advanced AI and weapons systems within. "Let them think we're primitive," James said. "Let them think we fight like we did 100 years ago. When they come," he gestured to the hidden preparations, the result of decades of secret space militarization. "They'll learn what humanity does best, adapt and overcome." In space, the Empire's fleet gathered. Massive ships, each capable of destroying entire cities, formed up in perfect military formation. General Marcus stood on his flagship's bridge, watching more vessels arrive through hyperspace. "Send the humans one last chance to surrender," he ordered. Tell them they have 24 hours to submit to Imperial rule. His communications officer transmitted the message. The response came back almost immediately. Just 3 words that made Marcus laugh out loud. Come and try. As the Empire's fleet began its advance, they remained completely unaware that humanity had already sprung their trap. The humans hadn't spent the last 50 years exploring space. They'd spent it preparing for war among the stars. The Empire was about to learn why humans had warned them to run. The Empire's first attack wave approached Mars with complete confidence. 20 massive warships, each carrying enough firepower to level a continent, moved in perfect formation toward the red planet. On the flagship's bridge, Commander Lee watched the seemingly defenseless Mars colony through his U-screen. No resistance, he reported to General Marcus. Their orbital platforms are primitive and inactive. Ground defenses appear minimal. Marcus smiled. Begin the attack run. Show them what real space warfare looks like. The Imperial ships launched their first volley, a warning shot designed to demonstrate their power. The energy beams streaked toward Mars's largest domed city. Then something impossible happened. The inactive platforms suddenly lit up, hundreds of them, creating a web of energy that caught and dispersed the Empire's attack. Before the Imperial fleet could react, the platforms released thousands of small objects. Debris? Lee asked, confused. Then his eyes widened. No, there. The small objects burst to life. Combat drones, each no bigger than a car, but moving with incredible speed and precision. They swarmed the Imperial ships like angry insects, their weapons slicing through shields calibrated for much larger attacks. Impossible, Marcus shouted. Their technology isn't this advanced. We checked their development level. On Earth, General Williams watched the battle through secure feeds. Activate Phase 2, he ordered calmly. The surface of Mars seemed to shift as hidden hangar doors opened in the planet's red soil. Real warships, not the decoy structures the Empire had seen, rose from underground bases. They were smaller than Imperial vessels, but far more numerous. How? Lee stammered, watching his tactical display fill with new threats. Where did they hide all this? Marcus grabbed his communication system. All ships, full attack formation. Show these primitives real power. But the humans weren't fighting like primitives. The drone swarms had already adapted to the Empire's shield frequencies. The Mars-based ships didn't engage in traditional formation battles. They split up, using the planet's orbit for cover, striking from multiple angles. They're not fighting fair, an Imperial officer shouted as another ship fell to the swarm attacks. In the Cheyenne Mountain Command Center, Admiral James watched the Empire's formations break apart. They still don't understand, he said to Commander Thomas. They're fighting the way they always have, like it's a parade ground exercise. Thomas nodded. Should we show them the orbital platforms? Not yet. Let's see how they handle this first. The battle above Mars turned into chaos, at least for the Empire. Their mighty ships, designed for grand fleet engagements, couldn't track the smaller, faster human vessels. Their weapons, built to destroy capital ships and bombard planets, couldn't lock onto the drone swarms. Marcus watched in horror as his first wave crumbled. 10 ships lost in the first hour alone. He had never seen anything like this in his entire military career. Fall back, he finally ordered. Regroup at the rally point. As the surviving Imperial ships retreated, they detected new signals behind them. The supposedly primitive defense satellites around Earth had come alive, revealing their true nature. A network of advanced weapon platforms that had been disguised as simple early warning systems. General Marcus. A voice came through on all Imperial channels. It was Admiral James. That was just our Mars Defense Force. Would you like to see what Earth's full military can do? Marcus stared at his tactical display in shock. The humans had hidden their true capabilities so well, waited so patiently, and struck with such precision. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was advanced strategy. Return to the fleet, he ordered his remaining ships. We need to rethink our approach. As the Empire's ships limped away from Mars, General Williams turned to his staff. Send the footage of this battle to their central command. Let them see what happened to their simple warning shot. In the Empire's fleet, Marcus received a priority message from the Emperor himself. It contained just 4 words. What have you awakened? 3 days after the Mars defense, the Empire's fleet regrouped near Jupiter's orbit. General Marcus studied the tactical displays showing his remaining forces. Nearly half the first wave lost to those impossible human drones and hidden ships. No sign of human pursuit, his sensor officer reported. Their fleet remains in Mars orbit. Marcus nodded, but something bothered him. The humans had proven clever, too clever to simply wait. Scan the entire system. They must be. Alarms screamed across the bridge. Ships were appearing out of nowhere, emerging from what looked like empty space. The Empire's sensors hadn't detected them at all. Stealth technology. Marcus gasped. That's not possible. Admiral Peters stood on the bridge of the lead human stealth ship, the Ghost. All ships, execute pattern Delta, he ordered, just like we practiced. The human vessels, developed from decades of stealth aircraft research, moved like shadows through the Imperial fleet. Their hulls absorbed sensor signals, their engines ran silent, and their weapons struck without warning. They're targeting our supply ships, an Imperial officer shouted. Peters smiled grimly. Cut off the head, and the body dies. Cut off the supplies, and the fleet starves. The Empire's mighty warships turned to defend their supply lines, but they were fighting an enemy they could barely detect. The human ships would appear, strike critical systems, and vanish again into the void. Back on Earth, Admiral James watched the operation unfold. Begin Phase 2 of the counterattack, he ordered. Across the solar system, hidden communication arrays activated. Every Imperial ship's communication system suddenly filled with transmissions, but not military orders or threats. Instead, they broadcast scenes from human history. Soldiers surviving behind enemy lines, resistance fighters taking down larger forces, scenes of humanity's most desperate battles, with commentary in the Empire's own language. This is what we do when we're outgunned. This is how we fight when surrounded. This is humanity when backed into a corner. On the Imperial command ship, Marcus watched his fleet falling into chaos. The humans weren't just attacking their ships, they were attacking their morale. Sir, his communication officer called out. Multiple ships are reporting crew members refusing to fight. They're scared, sir. In the outer reaches of the fleet, Captain Turner of the human strike team Ghost Squadron led his ships through another hit-and-run attack. Remember, he told his crews, we don't need to destroy them all. We just need to make them understand the cost of continuing. The Empire's neat formations had completely broken down. Their ships clustered together for protection, making them easier targets for the human attacks. Every time they tried to regroup, another stealth strike would scatter them. Marcus received an urgent transmission from Imperial High Command. Sir, we've lost contact with our forward bases in 3 star systems. Somehow, the humans are already there. The blood drained from Marcus's face. While he'd been focused on their fleet actions, human special forces had been infiltrating Empire territory. They hadn't just been defending. They'd been preparing a massive counterattack. Admiral Peters authorized the final phase of the operation. His stealth ships launched special packages toward the Imperial fleet. Not weapons, but data cores. Each contained detailed information about human resistance movements, special forces operations, and guerrilla warfare tactics. Let them learn, Peters said, exactly what they're dealing with. The Empire's mighty fleet, which had never known defeat in 1,000 years, began a rapid retreat. But as they fled, they discovered another terrifying truth. Humans had already mapped their hyperspace routes and placed disruption devices along their escape paths. In the Empire's central command, Emperor Vale received a simple message from Earth. This was just our opening move. Would you like to see what we do when we really go to war? Or would you like to discuss peace terms? For the first time in Imperial history, the Emperor immediately called for a ceasefire. The humans hadn't just beaten them. They had completely changed the rules of space warfare. The Imperial War Council chamber was silent as the casualty reports scrolled across the massive screens. General Marcus stood before Emperor Vale, his proud posture now broken, his voice trembling as he read the numbers. 400 ships damaged or destroyed. 3 supply bases infiltrated. 7 hyperspace routes compromised. 2,000 crew members requesting immediate transfer. He paused, swallowing hard. And we still can't locate the human stealth ships. Emperor Vale's ancient eyes studied the battle footage playing on another screen. Human vessels appearing from nowhere, striking with surgical precision, then vanishing again. Their drone swarms adapting to Imperial defenses faster than anyone thought possible. "Show me their latest transmission again," the Emperor commanded. The main screen lit up with Admiral James's face. "By now, you've discovered our teams in your core systems. Yes, while you were gathering your fleet, we were already moving behind your lines. This is what humans call preparing the battlefield. Would you like to see what happens next?" A younger council member spoke up. "My Emperor, we've analyzed their technology. Their ships shouldn't be capable of this. Their weapons aren't more advanced than ours. So how?" "Because it was never about the technology," Commander Lee interrupted, entering the chamber. He had survived the Mars battle and spent days studying the human tactical data they'd been given. "Look at their history again." He brought up scenes from Earth's past wars. Every time they faced a stronger enemy, they adapted. When they couldn't match Soviet tanks, they invented better anti-tank weapons. When they couldn't match American air power, they built complex tunnel systems. When they couldn't match British naval power, they used smaller, faster boats. The Council watched in growing understanding as Lee continued. "We thought space warfare had to be fought with big ships in open battles. They looked at space and saw hiding places in asteroid fields, sensor blind spots near gas giants, and 1,000 ways to strike without being seen." In the Empire's military academy, instructors were already updating their teachings. Footage from the Mars battle played in classrooms as veteran commanders tried to understand what had happened. "Notice how their drones attacked," an instructor pointed out. "Not with brute force, but targeting specific systems in specific orders. They didn't just build weapons, they studied exactly how to break our defenses." Back in the council chamber, another report arrived. The color drained from Marcus's face as he read it. "Speak," the Emperor commanded. "My Emperor, we've confirmed human agents have infiltrated 17 more systems. They're not attacking, just watching, learning. Some have been there for weeks, since before we even found Earth." Vale leaned forward on his throne. "They knew we were coming." Lee nodded. "They've been preparing for first contact for decades. All those primitive satellites we detected. Decoys. Their real technology was hidden, waiting. We thought we were examining them, but they were studying us." The Emperor stood, his decision made. "Send a message to Earth. Tell them we're ready to discuss their terms." "There's something else," Lee added quietly. "We found this in our database." He played one final video clip. It showed humans fighting humans, using tactics that perfectly countered the Empire's standard strategies. The date stamp showed it was from 50 years ago. "They didn't develop these tactics to fight us," Lee explained. "They already had them. They've spent centuries learning to fight enemies stronger than themselves. We just never imagined someone would approach war this way." As the Empire's leaders finally understood the full scope of their mistake, Admiral James received their message on Earth. He turned to Commander Thomas, who had warned them in that first meeting. "They're ready to talk peace," James said. "Should we show them our real fleet now?" Thomas smiled. "No. Let them keep thinking what they've seen is everything we have. After all," he looked at the hidden shipyards beneath Europa's ice, where humanity's true space fleet was still under construction. It's always good to keep a few surprises, just in case. The Empire had learned its lesson. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the biggest weapons. It's the one that knows exactly how to use them. 1 year after the failed invasion of Earth, the Imperial Palace hosted an unusual ceremony. For the first time in the Empire's 10,000-year history, they were signing a peace treaty that gave another species complete independence. Emperor Vale sat across from Admiral James, both leaders watching as their representatives reviewed the final document. The terms were simple but revolutionary. Earth and its solar system would remain sovereign territory. No Imperial ships could enter without permission. And most importantly, humanity would share its military knowledge, but only for defense. "You understand," James said quietly to Vale, "why we insisted on remaining independent." The Emperor nodded slowly. "After seeing how you fight, I understand many things I didn't before." In the corner of the Grand Hall, Commander Thomas watched Imperial military officers examining recordings from Earth's history. Their faces showed a mixture of horror and fascination as they studied guerrilla warfare tactics, resistance movements, and asymmetric warfare. "This is what we call thinking outside the box," Thomas explained to the officers. "In space, you relied on big ships and direct attacks. We looked at the same battlefield and saw hiding places, ambush points, and ways to turn your strength against you." One young Imperial officer raised his hand. "But how did you know it would work in space?" "These tactics were developed for ground warfare." Thomas smiled. "The principles are the same. Whether you're hiding in a jungle or an asteroid field, whether you're disrupting supply lines on Earth or in space, warfare is about mindset, not just technology." In another part of the palace, General Marcus, now demoted but retained for his experience, watched in amazement as human engineers explained their drone swarm technology. It wasn't more advanced than Imperial tech. They had simply used it differently. "Your ships are powerful," a human engineer explained, "but power isn't everything. Our drones are simple but adaptive. They learn, they change tactics, they work together. Like a good guerrilla force." The Empire's military academy had already begun changing its curriculum. New courses appeared: adaptive warfare, asymmetric space combat, and strategic deception. The humans had not just defeated them. They had revolutionized their understanding of war itself. Admiral Peters led a delegation through the Empire's defense headquarters, pointing out vulnerabilities their infiltration teams had discovered. "Your security was perfect against direct attacks," he explained, "but you never considered someone might think differently. You built walls against armies, but left doors open to shadows." In the Imperial Senate, representatives from other species watched the proceedings with great interest. For centuries, they had believed military power was about size and strength. Now, humanity had shown them something different. Warfare wasn't just about what you could build, but how you could think. Back in the main hall, Vale signed the final treaty. "There is one thing I don't understand," he said to James. "You could have pushed for more. Your forces proved they could penetrate our defenses at will. Why accept just independence?" James looked at the Emperor thoughtfully. "Because we understand something your empire forgot long ago. The best victory isn't the one where you destroy your enemy. It's the one where you make them understand why they shouldn't fight you in the first place." As the human delegation prepared to leave, an Imperial teacher led a group of young students through the Palace Museum. They stopped at a new exhibition, "The Earth Campaign, a Lesson in Assumption." "Remember this," the teacher told her students. "The humans tried to warn us. They showed us their history, their ways of war. We didn't listen because we thought our way was the only way. Now we understand. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the biggest weapons, but the one who knows 1,000 ways to use them." In Earth's orbit, Admiral James looked at his home planet through his ship's viewport. The Empire's defeat had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the one thing humans had mastered over centuries of conflict, the art of adaptation. "Do you think they'll remember the lesson?" Thomas asked, standing beside him. James smiled. "They'd better. Because what they saw, that was just the beginning of what humanity can do." The Empire had learned its lesson, and the galaxy would never be the same. Sometimes, the best warning is the one you listen to before it's too late.